So we're going to get started. Julien is here in town for the next few months and offered to give a talk. Julien works at Mozilla, security engineer, right? Senior security engineer, director of security.
Yes.
Huh?
Nice to meet you.
I recognize the name. I was going to introduce myself later.
I recognize the beard.
So he's going to talk a little bit about, well, a lot probably about SSL and TLS for the pragmatic. So as I said earlier, if you feel like you're not pragmatic, you're welcome to go now.
Please stay.
I'll be in the back now. But before we start, we'll just go around the room, have everybody introduce themselves. It's kind of become a thing now. So just start with Jason.
I'm Jason Shale. I work at Pet360 and I'm a release engineer.
Oh, and before we continue, if you just speak up, because we are recording. If you don't want to be on the recording, then don't speak up. But here you go.
Is that loud enough?
It was loud. You're right next to the camera. So.
I'm Steven Corbacero. I work for Synchronous Technologies in Bethlehem. I'm a DevOps engineer.
I'm Dave Smalley. I'm Mike Smalley's brother. I work for Ben Sound Police Department as a digital forensic examiner.
I'm Ben Fry. I work at Firefox, IBM. I'm an operations engineer.
Craig Morrison, also Fiberlink, IBM, operations engineer. I heard the term full stack integrator. I'm trying to coin for my new nickname, so to speak.
Derek Laudner, work for Vox Media, operations engineer.
Chairman Simpson, VP of Network Operations, Meeting.
Bruce Yearship, system administrator for the
Bill Yurko, managing infrastructure team at Firefox, IBM.
Dave Lewis, sysadmin for Firefox, IBM.
I'm Bear, manager of operations at Anget. We're an ops consulting, full stack security dev shop.
I think you forgot.
Huh?
I think you forgot one of the buzzwords.
Gotta do, yeah.
I'm David. I do Android here at Meetup.
And I'm Lance. I am a security engineer at Zipper.
Julie?
Hi, I'm Julien. I'm a operations security engineer at Mozilla, and I do all sorts of cryptography, network security, web application security, and incident response kind of things across the network.
All right. It's all you.
All right.
Oh, and after we will be going to Triumph, as many of you are already familiar with. Triumph is right across the parking lot here. So it's a brewery. They have beer. You should go.
Yes.
It's all you.
It's a beer. Hi. So this is a talk I prepared. I was discussing with Ben at the last meetup about what do we want to see in that kind of talk. I said, why don't you tell the story of cipherscan, which is a tool we wrote to evaluate SSL and TLS on servers. This talk is very much the story of cipherscan and why we wrote it and what we learned while writing it, how to use it, these kind of things. It's called SSL TLS for the pragmatic, mostly because my team is a team of pragmatics. We do operations security, we don't do security research. And that at Mozilla is a big difference because you have groups of people who work on cryptography and they work on developing the next generation of cryptographic protocols, TLS 1.3 and so on. And there's a great difference between operating security and developing security. It's not the same thing at all. And if you talk to people who are too close to developing security, they will give you recommendations that you can't really use because they're not implementable on your systems. So this talk is about being pragmatic, about implementing things that exist on your servers that you can actually use and that really shouldn't take you 6 months to figure out. This is not on. There you go. Who is OPSEC at Mozilla.com? So OPSEC is a small group of 7 people inside Mozilla. Mozilla is like 900 strong right now. And what we do is that we work with the various admins teams and developer teams and helping them secure their environments. So we don't actually perform operation directly. We assist and we consult with operation groups. So one of the kind of things we'll do is that, well, of course, if there's a breach on a system, we will jump in and do the incident response But on normal operations, what we do usually is that we look at architectures and projects and we help developers secure them. And one thing we do a lot is review the security of these architectures and projects. And TLS is one of the aspects we look at a lot. So why should you care about TLS and HTTPS? It's a given that you want HTTPS most likely everywhere. There's really, like, this is not the 90s anymore. There's no good reason to not use HTTPS on all of the page of your site. It works. It should be fast. It should be doable. There's a couple of places where there's still nonsense, like on CDNs where they will charge you a ridiculous amount of money for just using HTTPS to deliver content. But that is changing and prices are going down. So soon enough you should be able to deliver content through CD and using HTTPS for a reasonable cost. However, if you do HTTPS the wrong way, it can really hurt your traffic. If you use a default configuration on something like Apache and you have a very bad server, you might end up with ciphers that literally provide zero encryption, no encryption. So you send traffic, you're saying it's using TLS and it's secure, but in fact, there's no encryption applied to anything, it's only clear text. Many ciphers are extremely slow, and you can very easily end up adding an extra 600 or 700 milliseconds on each handshake that you do between a client and a server. That's before you serve the first byte. So you're on a connection, you establish your TLS connection, there's a whole sort of handshake with Diffie-Hellman that happens, it's 700 milliseconds, and then you start processing the web request, which might take an extra 1, 2, 3 seconds. That matters. For big web shops, it matters a lot because Google will look at that latency and take it into account in the ranking of the site. So being fast when you do HTTPS matters. Doing certificates the wrong way, that's something that we see a lot as well. Certificates are becoming increasingly more complex, and it's very easy to pick a certificate that is not done correctly and display errors in clients. So that's difficult. And I think that last one is my favorite. You might secure things, you might do it perfectly right, and you're testing with Chrome, with Firefox, with Internet Explorer, everything works great. But what you don't know is that grandma, who happens to have an Android phone, but it's a 2.0, uses a version of the browser that doesn't support any of the cipher you just set up. So she can't connect to the site anymore. And that's true for all clients, all web browsers. It's even more true for bots. And you wouldn't imagine the number of search engine bots or monitoring bots that just don't support good TLS. They only support things like SSL v3 or old ciphers. So we want good HTTPS everywhere, but we also want to do it right. That's pretty much what happens when you start looking for TLS guidance. You Google, I need to correct that, you Yahoo, TLS guidance, TLS guide, TLS configuration for Apache, and you will find probably a couple of thousands of pages with blog posts that explain how to do TLS and which ciphers you should use and how you should configure your library, etc., etc., etc. Now, a lot of them are great. They provide very good advice, but they're never comprehensive and they're never kept up to date. A blog post is written 3 years ago, it's not going to be valid today, things have changed. So finding a document that is actually up to date is really, really hard. There are a few, I mentioned them, but what happened to us is that we started looking at this and we realized we need to write our own. So that's why we wrote server-side TLS. One of the sysadmin in the web operations team came to us one day and said, well, we need to set up HTTPS on this site. Do you guys have a document that can help me set it up the right way? And we looked at it, that was 18 months ago. We said, well, we don't actually have a document, maybe you should write one. Just take a day or two and put things down on a wiki page or something like that. A day or two, right? It's been 18 months, I still update it. So, good configuration takes a lot of time. It's really hard to figure out the various little parameters you have to tweak, and which one you should use and where, and what's the default configuration for this, and should I read the Nginx doc for that parameter, or what if I'm on Apache? What if I use a chip proxy? So it's really hard. So we try to capture all that into a single wiki page. And then what I was working on that, one thing I found is that finding out what is currently supported on the server is increasingly hard. You can use SSL labs, but that's a web page. It takes a minute and a half to load. It's great, but it's also not easy to use. Like I'm on a terminal, I want to just type a command and wait 5 seconds, and I want the output to just come right there on the terminal. So we would cipherscan for that. And what cipherscan does really is just look at a site, here mozilla.org, and try to connect with all of the possible ciphers it knows. And it's a wrapper for OpenSSL command line, really. It tries to connect using its own list of cipher order. It will try, it might start with AES-128, or it might start with DHE. And the server will reply and say, well, I want you to pick this one. All right, I'm going to try a second connection. I'm going to remove the one you just told me to pick. So the server will say, well, you don't have that one anymore. Now try the second one. Okay, etc., etc. And that gives us the cipher ordering of the server. And that is, I'll explain it later, very useful when configuring, very important when configuring a server. Cipherscan gives a couple more informations. It gives information about the certificate that is used, if it's trusted or not, what key size it's using, what signature method it's using, if it's SHA-1 or SHA-56. It will give information about the TLS ticket support, so if there is TLS ticket support on the server. I'll explain that as well. OCSP stapling, we talked about that, and server-side ordering or client-side ordering. So I'll get into cipherscan in more details later in the presentation, but first, a little bit of history, and just because I really wanted to put that picture, because I know Max loves it.
When was that actually run, the previous?
That was on a...
Pre-Poodle?
That is way pre-Poodle.
No, that, the last one.
The last one?
Again, the last one.
This is not pre-Poodle. That is today. That is today.
So you have SSL v3?
Yes. And I'll explain why.
Okay.
It's actually intentional. So a bit of history, 1969, great group of people, very smart guys, designed the first internet, the ARPANET. That was great, except it has no security at all. Why it had no security is still a mystery. We were in the middle of the Cold War. We were right after the Second World War, where everybody was busy breaking Enigma and other sort of ciphers. All of the scientists knew what happened in Great Britain and how they broke Enigma and how the computer came from that. So they knew that cryptography was important, they knew that security was important, and yet, if you look at the first networks and the first network designs, there is no security built in, nothing. They were probably optimistic and just didn't choose not to worry about it.
No, the internet was designed back then, the ARPANET was designed to deliver packets. It cared less what the item was. It simply says, I'm wrapping your packet and sending it. And it was agnostic to everything.
And what's interesting is that they predicted with the idea that it would really withstand a nuclear attack. So they had a military goal in mind, and yet they didn't care about the security of the packets.
Well, no, but they just wanted to deliver. Back when I was working on stuff that whole, it wasn't the fact that we weren't worried about security, it was the fact that the security was implicit in what you were sending. You secured everything. Because it was routed from, you never could know what servers it was routing through, and it was also point to point. It wasn't...
it was a closed network.
Right. And you also had to use bang paths half the time to transmit data. So you never knew how long it was going to sit on that server, or the capabilities of the server to receive or decrypt it or anything. So you just wrapped it and sent it.
It's a closed network, you don't need cryptography inside of it. Well, it turned
Sorry,
out it was a little bit of they didn't really foresee what it would become. And it's nowhere here. So that's why in '94, Netscape, pre-Mozilla, creates secure socket layer. And secure socket layer has one goal. It's provide privacy and reliability between two communicating applications. So it's point to point, it's a channel. They want privacy, they want encryption of the data. They want to verify the identity of a server or a client, and they want integrity. So they want to verify that what was sent and what was received are actually the same thing. The people who designed that were extremely smart. The engineer at the head of the working group was El Gamal, a very smart photographer, who is now, I believe, the chief security officer at Salesforce. He has a couple of cryptographic algorithms under his name. And the engineers who worked on this were really smart. And the protocol they built is really impressive. It's complex, but it's impressive. It fits right here, in between the transport layer and the session layer. So you have TCP here, IP underneath, and SSL is right above TCP. It plugs into the socket, the TCP socket, retrieves the data from the TCP packet, and does things with it, and then gives it to the application. So the way they designed it was elegant because they didn't need to modify any of the existing stack. They just needed to modify the application on top of it. However, it's already fairly complex. In order to establish a secure channel, you need to have all of these steps between a client and a server. That's a handshake. So you can see that we're already at 14 steps to establish a communication between a client and a server. Like, this thing didn't start simple and become complex. It started complex. It didn't have any chance of ever being simple. That's TLS in 2014. The number of features is just ridiculous. There's way too many. A lot of them are actually not even used. DTLS is very rarely used. It's TLS over UDP. Few people use it. And yet, because OpenSSL supports it, we had heartbeat 6 months ago. Because the heartbeat mechanism in DTLS is only used over UDP, but yet it was enabled everywhere. So the complexity, we have perfect forward secrecy. I'll talk about that a bit. Session resumption, compression, please disable that. Cipher suite ordering, dozens of extensions, server name indication, a CSP stapling, next protocol, I forgot what the last one next is, elliptic curve selection, negotiation, etc. And we're not even talking about certificates yet. That's just TLS itself. So it's hard. There is an equal number of problems with TLS. It's really, really difficult to implement, and very few people can work on it. There's very few people who can work on OpenSSL, very few people who can work on NSS. I think there's probably 5 to 10 serious TLS stacks out there, another couple dozens of amateur ones that no one uses, but it's really hard to implement. And that's, like, imagine, it's a protocol everybody uses every day in the entire world, and you have 10 libraries that can support it. It's almost unheard of. And because it's too hard, you can't write a good TLS stack. The attack surface is huge. TLS uses pretty much every single cryptographic principle that exists. Everything is in TLS. If you're ever curious about what we know about cryptography today, you can look at the TLS RFC. It's probably in there. And we've seen attacks on pretty much every single aspect of it. Cryptanalysis of protocols with RC4 and whatnot, message padding vulnerability, timing attacks. Timing attacks are fun. It's when you send different data to a TLS stack, it might take a different time to process it. And based on that, you may be able to figure out the key. Implementation bugs, tons of them. Hotbleed is one of them. Negotiation issue, downgrade attacks, etc., etc. One of the problems is we rely on it too much. Every single site relies on it. HTTPS is everywhere, and we can't do anything without it. And because of that, we can't replace it. There's just no way we're going to change TLS. We have to work with it. There's no alternative. There are alternatives that exist. NaCl is one of them. There's libsodium. There are great libraries, but no one is going to use that on their site because there's no standard. No browser supports them. So it has to be TLS. TLS is not getting simpler anytime soon. Forget about it. TLS 1.3 is coming. It's going to have more extensions. The format's probably going to be different. I hear that it's going to be a complete rework of TLS 1.2. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be simpler. So we must use SSL TLS, and we must do it right. So what does that mean doing TLS right? there is probably 15 to 20 items to put in this list. I'm going to focus on 5 of them. If you have to remember things about TLS, remember these 5. It's going to be enough. And the rest, you can eventually figure it out if you ever need to. But these 5 are really the most important. The first one is really cipher suite order. So a server, when it receives the connection, will use, by default, the cipher that's at the top of the list sent by the client. So the client establishes a connection, sends a list of ciphers it supports, the server will pick the first one. The client can be opinionated, say, well, I only want to support these 3 ciphers. The server will pick the first one on the list. It's called client-side ordering. If you look at a server with cipherscan, it shows at the bottom that client-side ordering is set, then you should probably fix it. Here's why. Here's what happens on the test site when there is no server-side ordering. The server does not enforce the cipher. You connect with OpenSSL as client, great tool, and you give it a cipher suite. And that cipher suite only has 2 ciphers in it, AES-256 SHA and RC4 SHA. Great. The server replies and says, okay, we're going to connect with AES-256 SHA. Fine. Now you swap them. You put RC4 SHA in the front. The server will say, all right, I'm going to use RC4 SHA. The problem is, RC4 SHA is not secure. You shouldn't use that. With server-side ordering, try it on Google, the same thing. Try to swap the 2 ciphers. But in both cases, Google will say, I don't care about RC4 SHA. I think AES-128 is more secure, and since you support it, I want to use that in the connection. So what that means is that regardless of the security level of the client, regardless of the cipher suite ordering the client will support, it can be an old bot from 10 years ago that has messed up ordering, the server has the ability to say, I want to prefer the highest security level. So you can control, it's hard to update clients, it's easier to update servers. So when we modify the security of the server configuration, we can actually influence the security of the users. That's why server-side ordering is important. Yeah, a little bit of RC. No one wants to read that. It just says the server is allowed to select a pizza cipher. So here's how you do it. It's very hard. It's 1 parameter in your interface on Apache config. Really hard to use. The problem is that if you don't know about it, you're never going to set it. It's never by default. So on Nginx, prefer server ciphers on Apache or cipher 4. You use AWS? Fine. On an ELB, just say define cipher order value equal true in your ELB policy. Pretty much all proprietary termination appliances have similar settings. Some of them come with better default than others. I didn't put all of them here. Some of them on the server-side TLS page. But yeah, you should be able to find the setting you're looking for. However, we can order ciphers on the server side, that's great. Now, what order do we want to use? The problem is, picking the right ordering is really difficult. There are dozens of ciphers. Which one should you use? Which one should you prefer? And believe me, people get very passionate about this. There are entire threads of discussion on mailing lists where people discuss for days which one of the 2 ciphers should be above the others. I'm one of them. I love that thing. We can just talk about it. Anyway, we can have a beer later if you want. Here's what we want in our order. First, we want to prefer forward secrecy. I'll define that later. Just trust me for now. We want to prefer modern ciphers, ECDHE, AES, GCM. We want to maintain compatibility with all clients, AES, SHA, and 3DES. We want to remove all of the completely messed up ciphers, RC4, MD5, SSL v2 protocol, SSL v3 maybe. Not always. So that's the cipher suite we use by default at Mozilla. It's a little bit long. You should use it. And the reason why is because I see a lot of people who who want to shorten that cipher suite because they don't find it pretty, they don't find it elegant, and they come up with OpenSSL shortcuts that make it actually, you can make it a one-liner if you want. But that means you will rely on OpenSSL's opinion of what a better cipher suite is, as opposed to just defining it yourself. This one defines, so you can split it on the columns here, what the exact ordering should be. And the first one is ECDHE, RSA, AES 128 with GCM, SHA-256. That is the cipher you want to be using for 99% of your connections. Firefox supports it, Chrome supports it. I don't know yet if Internet Explorer supports it. But that's the one you want to use. And then it gradually reduces the security level up until you reach, here you will have 3DES. 3DES is an old cipher. It's ridiculously slow, but it's also the only one with RC4 that is supported on Windows XP SP2, SP1, SP2. And since RC4 is broken right now, you don't want to be using it anymore, then you should really replace it with 3DES. But because it's at the very bottom, it means that only clients that are on Windows XP, Internet Explorer 6 will be using this. So you're really not impacting a lot of people. And then here, the ones preceded with exclamation point here are the ones that are discarded. So no RC4, no MD5, no pusher key, etc., etc. No null ciphers. That is important. You want to always use encryption, etc. So don't. The slides are available, but don't retype it. Just copy and paste it from the doc. It's easier.
Why do you have to exclude ciphers rather than just not list them? Doesn't that exclude them?
So it will be. It should normally exclude them if you don't list them in the cipher suite. However, I have seen servers that choose to append a or something at the end of the cipher suite. So by using this, you just make it deterministic. Like whatever the server decides to do, I want OpenSSL to take this and just discard all the stuff that's in there.
Someone with that code calls out OpenSSL with the cipher list, and then basically cherry picks the one you pick, and then adds the rest of them to the end. So that's why you don't like it.
What's the difference between anal and email?
Oh, you had to ask, didn't you? I need to look on the page. Anon is one of them is one of them is one of them has an accent. So I think this is authentication node, and I think this is encryption node. But I need to. That's just guessing. But I will make sense if anything ever makes sense in the stuff. Right, and the first thing is, once you're done building a cipher suite for OpenSSL, you can start building one for GNU-TLS, which is even more fun because GNU-TLS doesn't let you order things exactly how you want them ordered. You need to, at some point, use some of the GNU-TLS macros, which have their own ordering place. So that's my blog, but the ordering of this cipher suite on HAProxy on my side at home, and you can see that the 23 ciphers that are defined here are supported. So with ECDHE, RSA, AES 128, GCM, SHA-256 on TLS 1.2, because this cipher is only available when you're negotiating TLS 1.2, is at the very top, and at the very bottom we have 3DES, which is available on TLS 1. Now, on my side, I don't allow SSL v3. That's our default recommendation, and Mozilla does not allow SSL v3. We only enable it when we know we really need it. Let's talk about perfect forward secrecy and Diffie-Hellman. So PFS, I think, we've known and used PFS for years, but the industry started paying more attention to it after the Snowden revelations, because we started getting worried about RSA keys leaking all of the session secrets. So to really understand why it's necessary, we need to take a quick look at how TLS works without PFS. Without PFS, a client starts a TLS handshake. The client will throughout the handshake, generate a 48 bytes, I believe it's bytes, no, I think it's bytes, random number, encrypt it with the public key of the server, send it to the server, so the server can decrypt it with its private key, and only the server knows about it. And now the client and the server share that 48 bytes secret, and they can use it to encrypt the content of the connection using AES. So if I'm in the middle and I record all of the communications between clients and a server over the course of 2 or 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years I manage to get a hold of the private key of the server, I can decrypt all of these handshakes that happened in the past. I can obtain all of the session secrets that were sent by clients to servers, and using the session secrets I can decrypt all of the communications I recorded. So when you establish a connection with a server, your connection is secure as long as the private key of the server is secure, way past its expiration date. When you handle a private key on a server, you can, even when your certificate has expired, you cannot leak it. You need to destroy it, you need to keep it safe, you need to keep it secure because it can be used to decrypt past connections. That's without forward secrecy. With forward secrecy, things are a little bit different. The client starts a TLS handshake, same thing. The server will look inside the cipher suite and say, well, I want to pick a cipher that starts with DHE or ECDHE, the Diffie-Hellman ephemeral here. And I want to pick that, and I know I'm going to need to do a special kind of handshake for this. So I'm going to send the client a few elements to do that special handshake. The client receives these elements, and the client and the server, through cryptographic magic, negotiate a session secret that is not sent over the wire. The server has it on its side, the client has it on its side, but if I'm in the middle of recording the connection, I haven't seen it. I don't know that secret. If I get a hold of the key of the server 2 years later, I cannot decrypt the connection because I've never seen the session secret. So perfect forward secrecy means your connection is secure, and if someone steals the key of the server someday, your connection will still be secure. How does that magic happen? And that may look like math, but it's really high school level math, so it will be fun. Let's go through it. So the client has established a handshake. The server wants to do a Diffie-Hellman with the client. Okay, the server will pick a prime number, 23. Great, why not? It will pick a generator, the value 5, and it will pick a secret, the value 6. The server will calculate a secret capital A. That is this equation. Generator exponent secret modulo P. So that's 5 exponent 6 modulo 23. Very hard. The result is 8. Okay, so not too hard so far. The server would send P, G, and capital A to the client. Okay, so the client has some. Notice that the server did not send the secret A to the client. That one stays on the server, is never transmitted. Okay, the client will pick a secret on its own, B, a value 15. The client calculates capital B equal G, sorry, French. Exponent B modulo P, so 5 exponent 15 modulo, that's not 5 here, yes, it's 5, modulo 23 equal 19, so fine. So we have 19 here, we have 8 here. The client will send B to the server, fine. The client kept the value B secret, did not send it to anyone. So now they both exchange stuff. Now they're going to do one last operation. The server takes what it received from the client and calculates a secret S. So it takes a value from the client, capital B, exponent A, modulo P, so 19 exponent 6, 19 from here, exponent 6 from here, equal modulo 23, equal 2. The client does the same thing, calculates a value S, capital A, exponent B, modulo P, so 8 from here, 15 from here, modulo 23, equal 2. They both obtain the same value. The client and the server have established a Diffie-Hellman exchange, what they that they found a secret that is common to them. They both know about it. But that secret, the value 2, was never sent over the wire. The elements that were sent over the wire are not sufficient to discover 2. So if I'm listening to the communication and I see all of the various parameters being passed, but I don't know the secret A equals 6 and B equals 15, I can't discover 2. So that's the security of Diffie-Hellman. And when you establish a connection with Google, your web browser does this, or something similar to this. So, it's a massive, like 7:30 p.m. But that's very important to understand how it works. And a lot of people want to use PFS and don't necessarily understand the implications of it. One of the implications of this is that it's way slower than just using the general method. If you use DHE on a server, the regular method of DHE are 3 to 5 times slower than regular TLS. So here, if we look at accounts.firefox.com with cipherscan, we will see that the first 4 ciphers are ECDHE, 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 and DHE. Now, the fourth one, DHE, does exactly what we described. Exactly the same algorithm. ECDHE is a little bit different. It does the same thing, but on elliptic curves, and we won't be talking about that today. Just know that elliptic curves are faster than the regular method, and with the fast implementation of ECDHE, you actually get back to the level of speed you had without PFS. So if you use ECDHE, RSA, blah, 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 you don't have the performance loss. And here, look at this, PFS key size DH 1024 bits. Now, the 1024 bits here is a number of 1024 bits. That is actually the value P that we had here, that was sent by the server to the client. So the prime number P is what you see here in DHE 1024 bits. And when you set up a server for Diffie-Hellman on Nginx, I don't know, on Apache I think it generates it automatically, but on Nginx and HAProxy, it will ask you to give it a Diffie-Hellman parameter. And that is a 1024-bit prime number that is sent by the server to the client. That's what it is. Okay.
I think if you don't give Nginx it, it'll generate it per session.
Maybe not per section, I don't think. I think it does it when it starts up. Yeah. Because it takes a while to find a prime number. So I think it does it when it starts. All right, cool. So PFS is important. Use it. AES. So AES is probably the only symmetric encryption protocol we use today. There's a couple others, Camelia, IDEA, but we don't really use them anymore. And why we use AES is because it's fast. AES comes in 2 modes. One mode is called CBC, Chain Block Cipher, and the other one is GCM, Galois Counter Method. All of the ciphers we used up until 2008 and implemented way later in browsers, we're using the CBC mode. And all of the issues we've had within my SSL vulnerabilities, but a couple of them were related to the CBC mode in SSL3 and TLS1. So CBC mode is what has made AES insecure in the past. And this is why in TLS 1.2, cryptographer came up with a new method of doing AES, which is called AES GCM. AES GCM also happens to be faster, way faster than CBC mode. And the other advantage and benefit of AES is that Intel has implemented it in CPUs. So now, if you use a CPU with the AES-NI instruction set, you get the speed just ridiculously fast. In AES GCM, that's on my laptop, I do 1.2 gigabytes per second of encryption. And with AES CBC mode, I do 600 megabytes. Camelia, which is a similar cipher that does not have AES instruction sets, lags behind at 160 megabytes per second. Now, if you run your own, if you build your own web servers and you do your own TLS as opposed to buying it from a vendor or something, pick a CPU that has AES-NI support. It's pretty much all of them right now, and you'll be able to push 1 gigabyte per second of encrypted traffic. Now, that is connection flow. That is not handshakes. The handshake may still be slower. So you need to look at two things: how many handshakes per second a server can do, and how much traffic can it push once the connection is established. Prefer AES 128 over AES 256. Why? It's faster. It's more resistant to timing attacks. It's better implemented, and because the freaking guy who wrote AES said so. So when I read people saying we want to use AES 256 and I ask them why, it's like because it's more secure. No, it's not. Look, don't wear a helmet in your car. Use AES 128. It's definitely sufficient. All right, we talked about encryption a bit, and now we have a better idea of why we want the ordering to be done in this way. Why we want to have ECDHC first, DHC to have PFS enabled. Why we want to have AES 128. I didn't talk about all the RC4s and all that saying. Now let's look at a couple of the more advanced features of TLS. And the CSP stapling is still fairly new. It's not deployed in a lot of places. It's not supported everywhere, but it's a very interesting feature because if you look at the regular way of doing a CSP, so you have a certificate and the client, the web browser, wants to know if that certificate has expired or has been revoked. It's verified its validity. There are two ways of doing that. The first one is download a certificate revocation list from the certificate authority. And those became so huge, it would probably take you, I don't know, half an hour to download one into Firefox. So it's not realistic to do on every connection establishment. The second method is to do a request to your CA, asking, hey, is this certificate that google.com is giving me, has it been revoked, so can I trust it, is it good? And the CA will reply, yeah, sure, it's still valid, you can use it. That's called OCSP. And OCSP, the way it works is that the browser will establish a connection. Well, first of all, we'll look up the DNS of a web server. Fine, okay, first latency. Second, we'll establish a connection with the web server. The web server will send the certificate to the client. Great. And now the browser needs to figure out if that certificate is valid or if it has been revoked. So it does another DNS request to, inside the server is written, my OCSP responder is at blah 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 digitrust.com. So the browser does a DNS request for blah 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 digitrust.com, and then we'll do an OCSP request to the OCSP responder of Digitrust. Digitrust will reply, yes, it's valid, you can continue. Then the connection with the web server continues and the web page is displayed. That doesn't work. OCSP responders are slow, they're not as well operated as web servers. And imagine Google that has data centers across the planet and wants to have 80 milliseconds to the page, having to wait for their own CSP or CA responder to limit the speed of their user is not possible. So the other method is to use OCSP stapling. And instead, that's one of the fancy extensions in TLS. Instead of having the browser do the request to the OCSP responder, the web server will say, here's my certificate, and by the way, here's my OCSP record. Why does that work? Because the OCSP record is signed by the CA. So it's kind of like an updated version of the certificate. Like you have your certificate that's valid for 2 years, and your OCSP record that's valid for 7 days. And you need to renew it every time. So it's a way of asking your CA, can you give me a little bit more trust for the next 7 days?
And how can you trust that? First thing that comes to my mind is, that's like someone saying, yeah, this isn't stolen, buy this.
Yeah,
you know,
because the OCSP response is another document that is signed by the CA. So your certificate is signed by the CA, and the OCSP response is signed by the CA as well. Now the OCSP response has a much shorter validity. So the CA needs to give it back to you every few days. But the client can verify both signatures. You can't forge an OCSP response unless you control the key of the CA, which you don't. So what happens here is that the browser will do the first connection with the DNS and then a connection to the web server, and the response from the web server will be literally, here's my certificate, here's my intermediate certificate, and here's my OCSP stapled response. Take everything, figure it out, and come back when you're happy. It makes a pretty big request. The web server, however, needs to be able to regularly connect to the OCSP responder of the CA, ask for a new OCSP response, and cache it. So this is only available on servers that support it. The latest version of Apache, Nginx, HAProxy does it, Riverbed does it, I think F5 does it, I'm not entirely sure.
They may do it, but they haven't pushed it to AWS yet, I think, but I know it.
To AWS?
AWS load balancer doesn't support it yet.
No, the ELB is different. The F5 AWS or
right.
okay, yeah. I don't use those. I know the ELBs, like the AWS load balancers, don't support it either.
Right. Okay.
But it's good, and the long-term plan that I've heard is that the little green bar you get on an EV certificate in Firefox would actually depend on having an OCSP stapled response served by the server. So if you want your user to have that green bar, that hasn't been implemented, the browsers don't do it yet, but that was a discussion I heard, that we would require servers to have that OCSP stable response. And that became a lot more apparent during Heartbleed when we had tons of revocations. And the revocations list became huge, and the pressure on OCSP to actually verify these revocations was huge. And this is when people realized that, well, we probably need something more distributed.
The only downfall of stapling is if you're upgrading your certificate, you better upgrade the certificate a day or two before you actually deploy it.
Yeah.
So that way all the servers have had a chance to H or cache out and get the new cert, because otherwise when you push your new certificate out, they're going to say, no, that's not a valid cert.
Right.
It's not in their cache list. And you have no way of forcing an update from the client side. So that's just something to be aware of when you're dealing with stapling is update your certificates at least 2 days before you actually push them live. If you try to do it at the last minute, you're going to get screwed.
Right. You can test for stapling with OpenSSL again. You just had that's in the latest version of latest versions of OpenSSL. If you add dash status at the end, it will do the OCSP. So if the server supports it, and it will output in the console this response here: OCSP response data, OCSP response status successful, etc. And it gives you at the bottom here. This update was done on November 15th. So that's when the OCSP record was retrieved, and the next update is due on November 22nd. So this particular OCSP response is valid for 7 days. This is how you do it. Again, very complicated to set up. This is how you do it in Nginx and Apache. It's really 4 lines. The trick here is that you have to make sure that your web server is able to do DNS requests, because it needs to be able to find the OCSP responder. That might get here. And then it's pretty straightforward. All of these are on the wiki page, by the way. Alright, session resumption. This one is important if you care and you care about the speed of connections. Why? Because we saw that the handshake is slow, and whatever you do is always going to be somewhat slow. It cannot be fast because of cryptography. And when you establish a connection, when a web browser establishes a connection to a big site, it will do at between 4 and 6 parallel TCP connections, which means potentially 4 to 6 TLS handshakes. That is slow. So to prevent that, there are caches. The first method is to do a session ID. The server will do the handshake with the client and say, okay, fine, we have a session secret. I'm going to give it a session ID. Gives the session ID to the client. Next time you come, I have that in my memory. You just give me the session ID and we can reuse the same secret. We don't need to redo the whole dance again. And it's faster. That's what we use the most today, session ID. So when you do your first connection, you do the full handshake. You have your session secret on the client side. You have your session secret on the server side. Then the next time you just send your session ID. You say, I have that session cached. just reuse the thing and you jump directly to exchanging encrypted data, much faster. The other method is to use a session ticket, not ticker. That is a server optimization to prevent having a cache on the server side, which could be big. If you have a lot of clients, if you handle a lot of connection, your session cache on the server might be big and difficult to handle. And there are also problems that if you have a farm of SSL servers and you need to distribute the cache, and that's not easy to do. So to prevent that, there's a session ticket. What the server will do is, okay, we have a session. I'm going to encrypt the session with a key that I know. And I'm going to give that to the client, the session, the encrypted session. When the client comes back, it gives the whole encrypted blob back to the server. The server will use the same to decrypt it. So in fact, the server uses the client as a cache. Just tell it, just keep that data, and when you come back, just give it back to me, and we can resume where we left off. Both these methods have a pretty big vulnerability, which is if you compromise the cache of the server, or if you compromise the key that signs the session, that encrypted the session on the server, then you can decrypt all of the sessions and obtain all of the session keys of all the connections. And servers handle that very poorly. If you set a big cache on Nginx, you might have session keys from connections that are 6 months old in there. You don't even know about it. So by leaking a session cache, you might actually leak a lot of data. That's the downside. When you use this, you need to protect your session cache. This is how you can do it. So the safe way of doing it, there's no perfect way to handle this. The safe way of doing it is use a session cache that's fairly small. You need to tune that to the amount of connections that are handled on the server. But 5 megabytes for the cache on Nginx or on Apache, it's rolling cache, so it will discard the old ones and it fills up again. That's usually good. The better thing to do, if you can, and it's not doable everywhere, is to do a graceful restart like every day. And when you do a graceful, it will just flush a session and restart from you. So put a cron job, and at 3 AM do a graceful of your servers. You flush a memory state, flush a session cache, you don't have to worry about sanitizing it. How you doing? That's usually how you should feel about this, after all of this. That's really how I feel.
I have an important question. Is that just a random cat from the internet, or is that a friend of yours?
It could be a friend of mine, but no, it's a random cat. My cat doesn't. My cat is French. It's not normal. That's what, as French, that's what we see as American cats. No, that's just a cat that did a lot of TLS. Alright, we're not quite done yet. Almost. A couple of things you need to watch for. Be careful of old clients. They are very annoying, but there's a lot of them. A couple of months ago, we changed the certificate on Mozilla.org from SHA-1 to SHA-256. 5% drop in Firefox downloads. Like, roll it back now. Because China still has a lot of Windows XP users on Internet Explorer 6. And we want them to download a better browser. So we need to keep a SHA-1 certificate for them. We also need to keep SSL v3 for them. That's why we're stuck with SSL v3. If you're dealing with slow-moving industries, banks, pharmaceuticals, that kind of stuff, chances are they have a lot of internal applications that depend on SSL v3, that cannot be moved from SSL v3. Same thing with SHA-1. Now SHA-1 is even more worrisome because you can control SSL v3, but SHA-1 apparently will be fully deprecated in a year or two, and certificate authorities will apparently stop issuing SHA-1 certificates. So take a look at your traffic and take a look at your clients, and if you know of clients that do not move to SHA-256 or to TLS v1, start thinking about it now, because in a couple of years you might be stuck. Java 6, love this one. I believe it was, I think they've updated it now, so I can talk about it, but New Relic, we were using them, and we increased the size of our Diffie-Hellman prime number from 1024-bit to 2048, and New Relic just, because they were using Java 6 to connect to our servers, and Java 6 does not support a Diffie-Hellman parameter larger than 1024. Now, what's great with this is that it's not even going to fall back. It's just going to crap out in the middle of the handshake and just leave you hanging there. What happened? No log, nothing. You won't see anything, it's just dead. So, fun. And there's really, we tried to upgrade the Cypher suite on rc.mozilla.org. We couldn't because there's so many IRC clients that use messed up SSL, we had to keep the compatibility. So it's not easy to upgrade, and you need logs. You need to log the SSL version, you need to log the Cypher, you need to look at your logs. Server support is really like snowflakes. You look at a version of Linux, it will have a version of OpenSSL and a version of Nginx or Apache. It will not support the same thing as its neighbor. Often between minor versions of distributions you will have differences. Not even talking about proprietary stacks. It's just really, really hard to find two servers that are the same or one configuration that applies everywhere. We built a configuration generator that's available on the wiki page that you can use to say I have Nginx, I have Nginx 1 or 1 point, I forget which version we're at now, and OpenSSL is this version, and I want the intermediate Cypher suite, give me the conf and we'll give it to you. Vendors are typically 2 to 4 years behind standards. We work with a number of them to help them test new versions of TLS, but they're moving slower than open source projects. AWS CLVs are actually pretty good, I suspect. I don't have any proof, but I suspect they use something like HA proxy in it. They are not easy to configure. You have very few parameters you can tweak on them. You can tweak the Cypher suite, but not the ordering, etc., etc. It's very limited. User guide. That's a Mozilla one. Qualys as another great one. Better Crypto as another one. So I think Qualys and the Mozilla guide kind of share the same goal of maintaining operability and backward compatibility. Better Crypto is more targeted to newer stuff. They really want to get away from the old clients and things like that. So depending on what your target is, pick the guide. Yes, and that's Ivan Ristic, who runs the Qualys SSL Labs, wrote a book called Bulletproof SSL and TLS, which is great. Actually, reviewed it, and it's great stuff. So if you want to pick up a book, this is the one to go for. User tool, cipherscan, Qualys SSL Labs. I love Qualys. It's really a great tool. I like the command line of cipherscan. That's what I use when I want a quick thing. But if you want to share the status of a site with someone, SSL Labs is the way to go. And one last thing, in cipherscan there is a script called analyze.py, and it's a Python script. It's an extension to cipherscan. It actually calls cipherscan and does a hood that will analyze the server configuration. Because if you look at the output of cipherscan and you pass the slides again, it's like, okay, what do I need to change now? No, it's too hard to do. So what we did is that we took the recommendations we had, and we took the output of cipherscan and we applied the recommendation to the output of cipherscan, and that gives you something easier to understand and more actionable. And if we take the example of Mozilla.org, that's the cipherscan output. So v3, TLS, v1, etc., etc. That's the output of analyze.py on Mozilla.org as well. Now, on Mozilla.org, we want the old configuration, the one that's backward compatible. And that's fine. It tells us, yeah, you match the old configuration, that's great. If we wanted to reach the intermediate level of the guidelines, then we will have to disable SSL v3, consider using a SHA-256 certificate, and consider using a Diffie-Hellman parameters of at least 2048 bits. And if we wanted to go to the modern level, then remove all of the ciphers that are not PFS, etc. Disable TLS1, disable SSL v3, etc. And the levels that are listed in the analyze.py tool map the levels we have in the Mozilla guideline. And the level in the Mozilla guideline map the clients, the oldest client want to support. So if our default configuration is the intermediate level, that will support Firefox 1, Chrome 1, IE 7, Opera 5, Safari 1, Win, XP, IE 8, Android 2.3, Java 7. So if you don't have any interest in supporting clients older than that, use the intermediate configuration, and if you do, then use the old one. The modern configuration, I would reserve that for internal sites, maybe. Public-facing sites, not so much, unless you know that your audience is going to be very technical, or you're using advanced features of browsers, like fancy JavaScript, and you know no one is going to be able to use it with an older browser. But Firefox 27 was released, I believe, in March of this year, and that's the oldest compatible client for the modern. So you see it's still very recent. It's kind of where we want to go, but we know that the internet isn't up to date to use this. And that's my last slide. This is a sample of various sites, not professional sites, more like small groups operated and personal, and that are around Mozilla that I collected. And I wanted to measure where they were at with their SSL. You can't read the number, but 38% of them don't have SSL at all, which is sad, and that's also because you have to pay for a certificate today or go restart SSL. And the rest, 61%, had bad SSL, which means they were probably using ciphers that are not secure, or probably using configurations that are not secure. None of them in there are using even old SSL or intermediate levels, which is our default, and even less a modern one. And what that tells us is that we still need to spend a lot of time educating, teaching, writing better documents, things that people can use more easily, and actually, use as a reference. Because right now, if you're alone or if you're in a small group and you have to set up SSL yourself, it's still really hard to do. So hopefully this tool will help. And with that, I believe this is what we call beer time, and I think I did exactly 1 hour, so that's pretty good. If you have questions? Beer? Yes?
How quickly is Mozilla looking to move to HTTP 2.0?
Yes. HTTP 2.0 is, so that would be in a slide that I wouldn't call HTTP for the pragmatic. It's experimental. We are playing with it. We are not running it on significant production sites. The reason for that is we don't run a custom HTTP stack. We rely on open source projects and appliances, and it's really hard to get HTTP 2 into those. My guess, beta versions probably around Q2, Q3 of 2015. I don't see it being in production on like Mozilla.org before middle end of next year. It should be fairly transparent. Like you use it already. Like if you use the latest Chrome or the latest Firefox and you go on Twitter, you're going to use HTTP 2. So it's fairly transparent for clients. It's not so transparent for servers. Pretty big version upgrades. So yeah, not fast. Probably faster than most, but not fast. When is Meet Me looking to move to HTTP 2?
We still have to move to a full SSL site.
So I actually looked at the SSL at Meet Me, and I was debating putting it on the slides, and I'm like, RC4 really? You get the tools now, no excuse.
Yeah, we saw like
Pizza.
Where is
pizza for us?
cipherscan found?
Yes, that's one thing I didn't say, but I'll be tweeting the slides, and all of these blue links here are hyperlinks to cipherscan. It's on GitHub, JVN/cipherscan.
because I had just started writing a tool like that to scan internally all my customers, and I love the fact that I don't have to write it anymore. Because OpenSSL is a bitch.
It is, and really all cipherscan is, and like many tools, it started as an afternoon hack around OpenSSL, and now it became much bigger. I still want to keep it small because I like the.
I ended up switching to PyOpenSSL, the module, for a lot of it. Well, because OpenSSL was so varied across my customers, but I could install PyOpenSSL and at least have a baseline. So, but evidently I haven't hit the edge cases yet for it that make you nod your head.
What I do is the cipherscan repo contains a statically built version of OpenSSL.
Okay.
And there is one for Linux and one for Mac. It's only 64 bits, but most servers are. Because it's just impossible to rely on the OpenSSL.
Well, that was my next question. If it can run on Mac, then you must have a hell of a time making sure that OpenSSL was the proper version.
Yeah, you gotta ship your own.
Yeah.
And that's if you want good SSL on like a standard server stack like Red Hat 5, Red Hat 6, not yet Red Hat 7, but Red Hat 6, you need to build your own OpenSSL. Red Hat 7, I tested today, CentOS 7, but I think they use the same package, actually has a good version of OpenSSL with ECDHE, ASGCN, all the fancy stuff. So that should get better. But yeah, server library versions are really, really difficult to deal with. And OpenSSL is still the most up-to-date one and the one we recommend to use on server side. We've had, it took a lot of effort to get TLS 1.2 and ASGCN and elliptic curves into NSS for Firefox. Maintaining these libraries costs a lot of money and a lot of time. So.
Speaking of elliptic curve, so what type of control from a server administrator perspective do you have over the curves that are used based on revelations from obviously the Snowden leaks that, you know, a lot of that may or may not have been backdoored?
None. Pretty much the only way to do it today would be to rebuild OpenSSL and remove the curves you don't want to use, because Nginx and Apache do not expose curve configuration. It's still very clunky to configure SSL on web servers. For example, what I would like to do is to have a different cipher suite for SSL v3 than for TLS v1, but I can't, because cipher suite is one parameter and protocol version is another. They are not related in any way. When in the TLS spec, they are related. TLS 1.2 ships with its own set of ciphers. So if someone negotiates, I don't know, ECDHE with ASGCN and has TLS 1.2, then I don't want them to see that I support 3 days. I don't even want it to be in the cipher suite. There's no sense. But we can't do that. It's the same issue with elliptic curve. The servers don't expose the parameter. I don't know if that's an issue with OpenSSL not being flexible enough, or if it's an issue with the servers not being, not having the options. We had a few discussions with Red Hat around building a recommendation for server developers on what they should take care of, and we discussed putting curve control in the servers and things like that. I think the next versions of Apache and Nginx will fix it, but right now you can't. Yeah, there's a couple of things I didn't show here, but if you have one thing that's useful and that might be useful to you actually is analyze cipherscan and analyze.py can output JSON, and what I do is that I run analyze.py across the 400 websites we have at Mozilla, and I feed that into Elasticsearch and graph it in Kibana.
That's exactly what I was building my tool to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that way I can gather the information and also monitor changes across time to see if somebody's messing with my servers.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to. So.
I don't think our setup is public, but I can definitely send you the details.
Well, if it outputs JSON,
yeah.
the details of getting into Elasticsearch and
it's fairly
scanning,
straightforward.
It's brute force. I mean, you can do it elegantly, but brute force works.
Yeah, just put it in there and make a dashboard and that's it. Really, it does it. I don't graph cipherscan results. I graph the analysis results, and that's how we're using it and put it over to tell people, well, you know, we still have 40% of sites that are SSL v3 enabled. Please change them. And we're running the scan daily to update and get a trend, things like that. It's fairly easy to graph, really. The other project I'm working on, so we have a couple of student groups working with the OPSEC team, and one student in Greece is right now working on a certificate observatory, and it's all written in Go, and parses certificates, store the data in JSON in Elasticsearch to grab it in Kibana. So the idea with that, and I didn't talk about certificates too much, but the sort of thing we want to do with that, you have a domain on, I don't know, Mozilla.org, and a domain on accounts.mozilla.org. You don't want to have a wildcard on the first domain that might compromise the second domain, because the wildcard on the first could impersonate the second one. So we want to have these rules built in and have a scanner that goes through all of the IP range of Mozilla and looks for the certificate and say, well, we have an offender here. And you need some sort of smart parsing of certificate and some sort of rules for that. We want to do it for certificates and also for samples. So hopefully that should be public, that is a code.
Any other questions?
Awesome.
No?
Thank you.
Thanks again. We record it, as I discussed earlier. Does anyone have a problem with that? Don't feel funny saying so if you do, or you can come to me in private if so. Otherwise, I'm going to be posting it to YouTube, and I'll share the link on our Meetup page. Thanks, Julien, for doing this talk. It's always a pleasure. Really informative. We will not have a meetup in December because of the holidays. Figure people have better things to do than come out here and hang out with us. So there's that. We also are not going to have a meetup in January as it stands. That could change, but we do have one scheduled for February. It's February 11th. We're going to have Tom Limoncelli here. You may know him, you may not. If you do, you probably know him as the guy who wrote the Time Management for Systems Administrators book. He has a new book, The Practice of Cloud Systems Administration, I believe it's called, and he's kind of gone around to a lot of different sites and kind of promoting that. So it should be an interesting talk, and encourage all you guys to come out, tell people about it. I don't know that it's going to be as technical as tonight's talk, so it definitely would appeal to a wider audience.
Sorry.
Huh? Hey, just people like to know what to expect. So, yeah, come on out. And if you guys know anybody who wants to speak in January, holler. Let me know, let Ben know, and we can arrange it. So, and thanks to Meet Me for sponsoring and buying pizza and letting us stay here. So, we're all going to head over to Triumph.